Welcome to the Dreamboat. Remember, you can join the DRI for just £30 a year. You get access to more content, including videos and discounts for our events. It's a great way of finding out more about our work, joining our dream community, and supporting this podcast. Details in the show notes and at driccpe.org.uk/membership.
Welcome to the Dreamboat podcast, a place where we talk about everything dreamy, all you wanted to know about dreams and where you might find some answers. My name is Laura Payne and I'm a psychotherapist and associate of the Dream Research Institute, the DRI, here in London, England. And I'm joined by fellow psychotherapist and TV presenter, Melinda Messenger.
Hello, I'm Melinda Messenger and I'm also part of the Dream Research Institute, and together we're a group of dream weavers and catchers, and we're called the Dreamboat because we are recording our podcast by the canal here at Little Venice in London. So listen out for the ducks.
I love talking about dreams, working with them and exploring them. So join us for this fortnightly series when we'll be looking at dreams, talking to experts in the field and answering your questions.
In the show notes, you'll find ways of getting in touch with us and the team via the DRI website and on the standard online places such as Instagram and Facebook. And our social media links are all in the show notes. So let's now get on with the episode.
Well, it's that time of year to wish you all a very Merry Christmas wherever you are listening in the world. And if you find yourself saying bah humbug to all that Yuletide well-wishing, then thank Charles Dickens for that little phrase. In fact, so much of how we see Christmas is thanks to Dickens and his novella A Christmas Carol, which was a smash hit when it was first published in 1843 and has sold and been told and retold ever since. In fact, I'm going to admit now, one of my favourite versions is The Muppets Christmas Story. It is very, very good. But I'm sorry about that.
That's a great choice, Laura. Absolutely brilliant, The Muppets Christmas Carol. And yes, the various ghosts that haunt the sleep of Scrooge, which is another name which, thanks to Dickens, has now entered our everyday language. They're a classic example of what we call a parasomnia or sleep disorder today. In fact, Dickens was an insomniac and had a very complicated relationship with sleeping and dreaming. And last year marks 175 years of The Haunted Man, which is Dickens' final Christmas book.
And who better to tell us more about this than our very special Christmas guest, Lucinda Dickens Hawksley, who is the great-great-great-granddaughter of Charles Dickens. She is an author, art historian, public speaker and broadcaster, and she hosts the Goldster magazine show podcast, lectures and writes extensively on Victorian Britain, and has a very long list of books to her name, including Charles Dickens and Christmas. So Merry Christmas and welcome to the Dreamboat, Lucinda.
Thank you, and Merry Christmas to you as well. And the Muppets Christmas Carol is one of the good versions that sticks to the text. The former director of the Dickens Museum used to put it on every Christmas for children visiting because he thought it really did Dickens justice. So you shouldn't apologise for liking it, Laura.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, Scrooge, it's such a phenomenal story, isn't it? And so powerful. And it's lasted the test of time. And why do you think that is, Lucinda? Why is it sort of so embedded in all of our psyches?
I think one of the reasons why it's just become a classic that all these years on people know and love is because Dickens wrote it with real passion. This was his protest song. It was written about child poverty. Most people don't realise that today, but it was written to highlight the terrible problems of child poverty that Dickens was really aware of. He'd been working with a friend on a pamphlet that he'd originally been going to write a pamphlet for the government to highlight a report that had come out about the terrible situation of child poverty in Britain at the time. And then he decided what was the point in writing this pamphlet to give to MPs? Who would read it? What would it do? So that was how he decided, no, I'll do what I do best and stick to fiction, and I will write a story about this man's transformation. And it's just the fact that he wrote such great plots. All of his novels have such compelling plots. And A Christmas Carol was written in just 6 weeks, so it has real immediacy. We're almost kind of reading it in the way that Dickens was writing it, this frenzied way of writing it. And you mentioned earlier, Melinda, his final Christmas book, The Haunted Man. Dickens wrote 5 Christmas books. And as you say, The Haunted Man was the last one. I think that the reason Christmas Carol and indeed The Haunted Man stand the test of time and the 3 in the middle don't so much is because they weren't written with such passion, because they were written very commercially as Christmas stories rather than with an inner message. And Dickens really knew what he was talking about when he described Scrooge's dreams or return to his past life, because Dickens had a very complicated dreaming life himself. He was insomniac, and he would really understand what it was like for Scrooge to have these extraordinary dreams, because we know that Dickens himself, remembered his dreams. For example, when he and his young family were living in Italy for a year, he had this really vivid dream that his dead sister-in-law had come back to him. Really, really vivid, that when he woke up, he thought it was real. So he was no stranger to the dream world himself.
Yeah, and you talking about his complicated relationship with dreaming. He had a complicated relationship with sleeping as well, didn't he? I vaguely remember reading somewhere he always made sure that the bed was set so he faced north or something like that.
That was right. Yeah, Dickens always had to have his head pointing north. He was a real believer that this would affect not just his dreaming and his sleeping, but his working life the next day. And he had various superstitions. He was quite a superstitious man, but he believed that these were kind of backed in science. And he also, when he couldn't sleep, he would go for really long walks. So he wasn't someone who just lay there and thought, how do I get through this? He would get up and go for long walks and try and break whatever the block was, whether it was writer's block or the stress about his relationship, whatever it was in his life, he would deal with by going out walking. And then he would discover the world at night. And he would later go on to write a wonderful series of essays called Night Walks, in which he talks about, walking around and meeting the people of the night, the people who work at night, the people who sleep on the streets at night. And so he was very connected with perhaps the world that most of us don't see. He was aware of what went on in the normal world at night, which I think most of us are happily asleep and unaware of.
It's quite interesting, actually, because I also try and sleep with my head facing north. And, because there is this idea that, our sort of internal compass, and when we're kind of aligned, sort of magnetically with the sort of the natural magnetic field of the earth, we're sort of more in balance and in harmony. And I'm really fascinated by Dickens's sleep patterns, because, we can call them, as I said in the intro, a disorder, but I don't necessarily think that they are a disorder as such. I think it's often that kind of veil, or the sort of the realms of consciousness that can become a bit blurred between dreaming and waking. And it just fascinates me how much he was sort of may have been tapped into that, because he had this incredible ability to, create these powerful stories, so was that something? Do you know much about his relationship with perhaps his kind of own inner life in that way?
Yes, I mean, Dickens did believe very strongly in the idea of the supernatural and the power of dreams. He always said that he'd wished he'd seen a ghost. That's why he wrote about things like the ghosts of Christmas in A Christmas Carol. But, are they ghosts or are they Scrooge's imagination? All these different things that he likes to leave to the reader. Dickens had a very questioning mind. So he would never rule anything out completely. He might scoff at something one minute, but actually he would be starting to look into it as well. So, for example, he wrote rather scathingly about kind of fake mediums, but at the same time, there was a big kind of craze for doing seances, or what they call table turning. And Dickens and his wife and sister-in-law and their two daughters at one point tried having a seance at home, because it was one of the things that he wanted to know if there was any truth, but he wanted to know what would happen. And he was kind of quite taken by this idea. So although he might outwardly appear to scoff at things that might be seen as a bit woo-woo or supernatural, there was something in him that made him want to find out more about all of these things. He was just incredibly questioning.
Why do you think it's had such an impact for such a long time? I know the characters are incredibly well drawn, and it's a fun story, but it's quite kitsch, isn't it? What makes it so popular, do you think?
I think the fact that everybody can identify with a redemption story, everybody has things in their life that they wish they'd done differently, or people who they wish behaved differently in their lives. And also the fact that Dickens captured the zeitgeist. So although he had no idea this was happening, in the same year that Dickens published A Christmas Carol, the very first commercial Christmas card was created. There were other things happening. The Christmas cracker was starting to be thought about. The Christmas tree would soon get into the public consciousness. Christmas was starting to have a renaissance. It needed a renaissance. And Dickens was at the very beginning of that renaissance in Britain. Of course, in Germany, things were already very much the way that we now celebrate them today. A lot of our traditions came from there via the royal family. Of course, the British royal family had strong German ancestry. But Dickens captured that time. If you look in the newspapers of the time that Dickens was writing this, in the early 1840s, for several years, newspapers had been writing, Christmas has lost its meaning. It's no longer about charity. It's no longer about helping the poor. It's all about the fancy clothes, the big feasts, the important presents, because the royal family's presents would be kind of detailed in the newspapers, which jewels that the royal family gave to each other. And who had the best parties, which duchess had the better menu or the bigger guest list. And in the past, Christmas had been a time for giving alms, for helping the poor, and generally for making sure that everybody throughout the country could enjoy themselves. And that, it was felt, had gone. So we might find this weird today, but in the kind of first half of the 19th century, people kept saying Christmas has become too commercial. Now, we would really laugh at this today because we think of Christmas being very commercial now, but that's what they felt had happened. So with this tale, which was about not what presents he could give, although we know that he gets the turkey and gives it to the Cratchit family, but that is about basic eating. It's making sure that the whole family actually has enough food. We see at the Christmas dinner that we experience with Scrooge, that there's barely enough food for them. None of them complain, but they eat every atom of it. So when he gives that kind of present, it's not like giving an expensive, unnecessary gift. So what A Christmas Carol did was to bring back what people felt was the original meaning of Christmas, caring for those less fortunate than themselves, helping those who need it, being together with family. And crucially, Dickens also tackled, which many modern day readers don't realise, the issue that most workers, which was the vast majority of people in the country, didn't have Christmas Day off. It was not a public holiday. That wouldn't happen for quite some years to come. But what it did do was make employers start to think, oh, okay, maybe we should close the factory on Christmas Day. Most people in the Cratchit family's position would not have actually been at home for Christmas. I mean, Scrooge gets cross and talks about Bob Cratchit picking his pocket every 25th of December by expecting to be paid for a day that he's not working. Martha, the Cratchit's daughter, probably wouldn't have actually had that day off in reality. And of course, if you were a domestic servant, your Christmas was spent making sure that the family you worked for had the best possible Christmas. Hence why in Britain we have Boxing Day, St. Stephen's Day, the 26th of December. And because that was the day that the servants actually got some time off. Traditionally, people in this country have leftovers and cold food on Boxing Day. They'll have salads and leftover meat or whatever it might be from the Christmas table, because that was what the servants would lay out before they had their day off. And the idea of a Christmas box was what was given to people who needed food or clothing or money. So a Christmas box was some kind of gift that would be useful to them. All of these things date back to this time when Christmas for most people was a time of really hard work. And in A Christmas Carol, Dickens was very much taking the side of the poorest and the most disenfranchised, saying, why can't they enjoy the kind of party that Scrooge's nephew and his friends are having?
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, how powerful the one man is able to kind of change the way we think, the way we see, the way that we behave, through a story. I mean, it really kind of brings home the power of his work and what he was able to do. I mean, it's quite extraordinary still to this day. And we need even more of it now. But of course, the contrast of what you're highlighting was so extreme back then. And he was able, through his writing, to bring these sort of cultural changes about.
And that is what's so powerful when you realise how important the written word can be. And he also began a revolution in publishing, because his own publishers didn't like the idea of A Christmas Carol. They thought, would you believe this, that it was an uncommercial idea and it wouldn't work. So Dickens self-published A Christmas Carol. He had to pay for the printing, for the production costs, for the expensive illustrations. And these were illustrations by a friend of his. And what Dickens always did in his years as a commissioner or as anything to do with publishing, with his magazines as well, was he always paid very fair wages. And he particularly wanted the four main images to be coloured, which meant every single book had to have beautifully hand-tinted illustrations before they could be sold. And these were done by his friend John Leach, who went on to become a very famous cartoonist working mostly for Punch magazine. So Dickens financially broke himself working on A Christmas Carol. He was overdrawn at the bank, which was a very dangerous thing to be at this time. Now most people have an ability to go into a free overdraft. But in Dickens's time, this was really serious. This was the kind of behaviour that had led his own father to the debtor's prison. So he really put his all into writing A Christmas Carol. Luckily, it paid off. It came out 6,000 copies, which was a big print run for then, as indeed be a big print run even now for most people. That came out on Christmas, so on the 19th of December, and it had sold out by Christmas Eve. It was on its third print run by New Year's Day. So it was a phenomenal success. He did change publishers as well. And then by the following Christmas, publishers and authors alike were writing or commissioning or editing Christmas stories. This general call went out, we need a Christmas story. And so A Christmas Carol led to this huge change in how people celebrated Christmas and how the publishing industry worked. And the Christmas story, as anyone will know if they've been to a bookshop recently, which I urge you to go if you haven't been to a bookshop recently, don't just buy them online, go into bookshops and look at all these things. So many Christmas stories come out every year. I've interviewed authors who say, oh yes, I write 2 books a year. I have a summer book and a Christmas book. And that is what their publishers still want. And that can all be traced back to the publication of A Christmas Carol. Now, it wasn't the very first Christmas story. There had been a couple earlier. Washington Irving, famously 20 years before Dickens published A Christmas Carol, wrote a kind of short story called The Keeping of Christmas at Bracebridge Hall, which was something Dickens was influenced by. He was a big fan of Washington Irving. There had been some seasonal stories, but nothing that captured the imagination in quite the same way as A Christmas Carol. This is why people attribute Dickens to changing the way that we celebrate Christmas, or to inventing Christmas, which he obviously didn't do. It was invented quite a long time ago in a very different country. But he did change the way that people in Britain, and through that, the wider English-speaking world, celebrated Christmas. And many of the things that we now associate with a traditional Christmas started around the time that Dickens published A Christmas Carol.
I understand, Lucinda, that you yourself have also just brought out a Christmas book.
I have. Thank you, Laura. Yes, it's a book called Victorian Christmas, looking at exactly this kind of thing, how the Victorians celebrated. And one of the things I really like about it is because in the 19th century, you made your own decorations, you made a lot of presents. There wasn't all the landfill rubbish. Like, I go into shops and I look at all this stuff that people going to buy and throw away. And it's really frustrating to me. So I really enjoyed doing things that looking like how you would create your own wreath for your front door. It's so much more fun doing it that way. But also at the beginning of Christmas publishing, the history of Christmas traditions, and some of them are really long. They go back to pre-Christian times, to pagan festivals that were brought into the Christian calendar by early Christians who wanted to get, the local population to join in and do things in a Christian way. So they would take original festivals and bring them in. So it was a really interesting book to look at, to see what was there before and what the Victorians did with those earlier traditions to kind of bring them back if they'd been forgotten.
Yeah, what did the Victorians do for us? I don't know about you, Melinda, but we used to make Christmas decorations when we were kids. I'm old enough to remember the paper chains that you would lick the ends so they'd stick together, and then you'd loop them all along.
I saw some for sale the other day, and I thought they brought them back, paper chain making kits. I thought, excellent. My childhood is now vintage.
But it's actually, I think, and it's kind of what you're saying, Lucinda, really, isn't it? And what Dickens's goal was with The Christmas Carol is it's those sorts of things, those homemade crafts, those homemade decorations, those sort of old traditions. They bring back in some of that meaning, because actually it's about creating something. It's about having that time together. Maybe you sit down with your kids and create these decorations, and you're creating it's a sort of a space and a tradition that has kind of more meaning than just sort of going out and buying, the tinsel or whatever it is. It's about restoring, what is Christmas really about? What is it really? Because of course, the sort of spiritual sense of Christmas is that it's a kind of going within, isn't it? It's a going within. We've got the sort of 12 holy days. It is about sharing and connecting with others and looking after people. And it's not about buying loads of expensive presents. So, but it really did get hijacked by, I guess, consumerism, and the world that we live in. So anything that kind of brings us back to those threads. So I cannot wait to read your book and also find out more of the history, the traditions that were there.
Well, one of the things that's so interesting about A Christmas Carol is that, of course, with The Ghost of Christmas Past, Scrooge is taken to his childhood Christmases and his time as a young man. And we see in the Fezziwig scene where you've got Scrooge as a young apprentice, and he and his fellow apprentice rushing around, getting the room ready for the party. All of that would have been Christmases that Dickens would have been told about by his grandparents or his parents. So we're looking at a Georgian Christmas in much of A Christmas Carol, because it was written at the very beginning of the Victorian age. And of course, Scrooge is an old man looking back at earlier times in his life. So I love the way that Dickens gives us that chance to see how Christmas was in the past, as well as how it is with the Ghost of Christmas Present, who, of course, is the Ghost of Christmas 1843, which, when Dickens wrote it, was the most modern time possible.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? I mean, I was just thinking in terms of, for the Victorian England in particular and the Victorian world, it was very powerful and had a big outreach into the sort of the public consciousness without all the media that is around now. It just underscores the power of Dickens's writing, that he could make such an impact without having access to things like Instagram or Facebook or any other sort of social media platforms. He had his platforms of the day, but he certainly made a massive impact. One of the things I was going to ask you, Lucinda, did he have any other famous dreams as such that inspired his work?
Not that I know that he particularly had his own dreams that inspired them, but he does write about dreams a lot in his works. So, for example, very famously, in Little Dorrit, Mrs. Affery kind of Flintwinch's dreams. She has these amazing dreams, which we don't know if they're dreams or is she seeing things that are happening, but she thinks she's caught up in dreams. And her husband gets really cross with her and tells her she's been imagining things. And actually she's been kind of waking up, but slightly fuddled, and seeing things happening in the house that she doesn't understand. And they've become very kind of famous in Dickens's dream lore, that what is going on here, what's happening to her, what's happening to Afra, what is her husband doing to her, who's very abusive. But the fact that she sees it as a dream sequence is a way of Dickens to get this across to the reader. You're never entirely sure what's she seeing. Is this really happening? What does her husband not want her to know? What do we as the reader, what should we not know about what's happening? It's a very clever plot device to have these dreams. And quite often Dickens's characters have dreams that they I think have real resonances for their life. It's a great plot device as well to bring a little bit of intrigue and a hint at the supernatural, which isn't necessarily supernatural.
It is really fascinating, isn't it? Because he's sort of sowing the seeds for thinking about or bringing into the kind of, lexicon or the collective consciousness, the ideas of, what consciousness is. So even to get people thinking about, where is the line between sort of awake and sleep and dream and real and not real? He's sort of bringing that into our awareness, isn't he, through the stories. And there was something that I came across recently, and I just wondered what your view might be on it, was the sort of linking of how similar A Christmas Carol is and the story is to the experience of something, say, like a near-death experience, because it has all the key features. There's the life review, the out-of-body, profound meeting guides, profound personal transformation, and that's all about an altered state of consciousness. And so I thought that was quite fascinating. And what's your take on that?
Yes, I've heard that before as an idea, and I actually think it's really fascinating because we are seeing an older man towards the end of his life, and we know that his business partner died 7 years ago to the day. And for Dickens, these anniversaries had a lot of resonance. And I love the idea that it is a kind of, near-death experience, that he's given this chance to come back. And we know this very much with The Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. We're being told, this is your grave. This is what we're seeing. So I think it's fascinating. I think Dickens would have possibly enjoyed that interpretation. Whether that was what was in his mind when he was writing it, I have no idea. But I think it's a really interesting interpretation. And I think that I know that people have gone into it quite deeply. I've read things that say, Dickens definitely was a lucid dreamer, and he was able to put all these things into his fiction. I find that very concept really intriguing.
Yeah. Well, as Melinda said at the start, they had many sort of what we now call parasomnias, which are sort of versions of sleep disorder. I understand he used to have hypnagogic hallucinations and those fleeting sort of perceptual experiences from the transition from wakefulness to sleep and vice versa.
Yeah. Well, what I love his kind of poking fun at the idea of sleep as well with Scrooge, when he doesn't believe Jacob Marley's ghost and he thinks that he's a piece of undigested food. And he says there's more of gravy than the grave about you. And the fact that Dickens was aware that if you ate a big meal, it might have an impact on your dreams, because he did suffer from nightmares as well. And I love the fact that he's really thinking this through. He's got Scrooge thinking about what causes these particular dreams. I can't be awake. This has to be a dream because there can't really be a ghost here. But I've got to come up with a rational explanation. And in some ways, that's very much Dickens himself. I know it's a very funny, it's a wonderful scene. And whenever you see it performed on stage, there's always it's a really wonderful to and fro between the actors because there's some great lines. But it does make me think more about how Dickens was thinking about what things in life might affect his sleeping life.
And does the Dickens Hawksley family have any great Christmas traditions that carry on each year?
Well, actually, lots of people in the family still do read Christmas Carol every year, which I do. I love it. We read it aloud. I really, really enjoy it. And I think that's something that has taken hold more recently as well, in recent years, with people in general. I do quite a lot of Dickens events, and people will say to me, my family now reads A Christmas Carol every year. I think it's something that's coming back into people's lives. Perhaps I wonder if it's with the advent of audiobooks, people are rediscovering the joy of reading aloud or being read to, because I'm finding really increasingly in the last few years, people say we read it aloud. There's kind of shorter versions that you can get. I know people do it kind of at lunch. You'll have each member of the family has a character, and then in between the courses they'll read things aloud. I just love Christmas, so I have put up my Christmas decorations fairly early, and now particularly because I often do lots of online events that start quite early. So I love decorating the house. I really enjoy decorating it. I go quite all out about it, and I feel very sad on the 6th of January. For me, that's one of the saddest days in the year when all the sparkly lights come down. I find Christmas quite difficult, and I love things like Diwali and Christmas, these festival of lights that bring so much joy in winter. My mother always left up her outside lights until Candlemas, which is the 2nd of February. And some years ago, I worked in Guatemala and I arrived in early January and was surprised that the lights didn't come down. And they also keep all their Christmas lights up till the 2nd of February. So I've adopted that. I like to leave outside lights at least up until the 2nd of February, because I think it's so important in the darkest days, which of course we have on this part of the world over Christmas, to just have that beautiful light coming through. Most people here end Christmas on Boxing Day. Dickens always continued until the 6th of January, which was 12th night, and also his oldest son, Charlie's birthday. And I really like that idea of keeping Christmas going. I think, but all this build up beforehand and then it's over in a couple of days. So I really like to extend, theatre trips, seeing friends, having parties right up until the 6th of January. I think that's a hugely important thing to do. And joking apart, I think it's really important for mental health because it extends that time, that chance to see friends and family, that feel good. It's not just, Christmas is over, now it's the end of the year, it's all miserable, there's nothing to look forward to. I think it's really important for everybody to continue celebrations. I don't mean kind of necessarily presents or anything like that, but just that enjoyment of being with people that they love all the way through and extending it. Be like a Victorian and go through to 12th night, which is 6th of January.
I love it. Yeah. Melinda, do you have any sort of special Christmas celebrations in your family that have lasted throughout the years?
We do, but I just wanted to say as well that, listen to what you're saying there. I really love, because you're sort of, talking about, it's about filling the cup really, isn't it? Filling that cup so it can sort of take you through the darker months, of connection with people and the celebrations. It's not necessarily about the gift giving, but it's something more significant. It's kind of, recharging us in a way. And I similarly, I do that, Laura, with mine. So we will extend the Christmas period as long as possible. And we usually try and do something like go and see a Christmas pantomime or go to a Christmas market. Go to often now the sort of various stately homes and parks have these light shows, so that's sort of been kind of incorporated into our tradition. And usually as well we have we will always have a little gift on Christmas Eve, so just something small that we each all open. And usually it's the same kind of foods that everybody wants to eat. So it's all those sort of tiny little things, I think, that, because essentially it's kind of, that's what the tradition is, isn't it? It's to get you into that rhythm, of what is it that we're celebrating, and all of those little reminders that we have just kind of help bring home that, okay, this is an occasion. This is something significant, and what is it?
Well, for me, it's a Christmas tree, and it is. I have to have a real tree every year. It's really important. So thank you, Victorians, for that. I'm very happy with my tree and putting the lights on.
I absolutely agree. We have a tree in a pot that started as a little tiny tree that now comes into the house every year. It's getting bigger and bigger. At some point, it's not going to be able to come inside anymore. It's grown quite a lot in the last year. But like you, Laura, my Christmas decorations are really important. I don't understand this just having a theme, one colour. Again, something that everything just gets thrown away at the end. I love the eclectic nature of Christmas tree decorations that I've bought from all over the world or been given. Every time I put them up, I think about the person who gave that to me. Certain things I have that belong to my parents who are sadly no longer with us. So those kind of things are so important. And I think that's not only putting them up, but when I take down the Christmas tree, it's a ritual things go back into certain boxes, and I think again about the people that I associate with them. I think it's a hugely important thing. And I think whether you celebrate Christmas or not as a religious thing, I think having that midwinter festival has been so important to human beings forever in history. I look back in any culture, and that midwinter celebration to kind of bring light and heat and basically to keep people alive in the deepest, darkest times, it's so important. And I think that still resonates through. One of the reasons why I think A Christmas Carol is so popular is it gives people that sense of joy that is perhaps missing in a lot of people's Christmases. I know that Christmas is not happy for everybody, and for many people it's a really difficult time of year, particularly when we've lost people that we love. But that idea that there is an internal change that we as human beings can go through. And Dickens wanted everybody who reads it to realise that they've all got a bit of Scrooge in them. But in his own time, he didn't like the idea of people who went to church on Sundays and then walked past starving children on the way home. He found that type of Christianity really stifling. And he wanted everybody to see that they could all do something to make other people's lives a bit better at Christmas particularly.
Well, Lucinda, many, many thanks for coming to join us. I would wish you Merry, Merry Christmas. Wish you a Merry Christmas as well, Melinda. It's lovely having you on board as part of the Dreamboat team.
Thank you. And Merry Christmas to you both.
So I'd love to wish you both a very Merry Christmas as well, and to all the listeners. So go out there and be like a Victorian and feast and be merry, but just be careful of those ghosts of Christmas past, present and future if you're being a bit of a Scrooge.
Bye-bye, everybody. Many thanks. So thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dreamboat podcast, and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show notes for links, or find us on Instagram and on our Facebook page and on our website at driccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further, or you would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £30 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for all of our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with latest dream research news, and we'll also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.